Hey there, I'm Ben Schneider and this is Real Beans, where we sip slow, talk deep, and take another look at the films and flavors that linger long after the credits roll. This podcast lives in the space in between the moments that make us pause, feel, remember. So whether it's bold and brooding or smooth and nostalgic, you can always count on one thing. We sip, we watch, we repeat.
Assassin! Assassin!
Welcome to Real Beans, where we steep our souls in cinema and coffee. Today we're poring over my personal favorite film. Not the best film ever made, maybe, but the one that clings to me like memory itself, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Now, before we get to Maggie Smith, Giotto, and the question of whether Miss Brodie is, in fact, a monster, a bit of grounding. The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie was originally a slim but potent novel by Muriel Spark, sharp, wry, and endlessly quotable. The film adaptation came in 1969, directed by Ronald Neame, with a screenplay by J. Preston Allen. Jean Brodie had already lived on stage, brought to life first by powerhouse talents like Vanessa Redgrave in London and Zoe Caldwell on Broadway. Caldwell, in fact, won a Tony for this performance. But then came Maggie. Maggie Smith's Jean Brodie is one of the most layered performances I have seen on film. There's not a single wasted expression. She glides through the role like a dancer in battle boots, full of bravado, certainty, grace, and cruelty, sometimes all in the same breath. It was this performance that won her the Academy Award for Best Actress, and rightly so. This wasn't just an award-winning role, it was a career-defining one. From that moment on, Maggie Smith wasn't just respected, she was revered. But what's often lost in the glow of Smith's Brodie is how essential the two women who orbit her are to the story, and to that performance. Celia Johnson as Miss Mackay is Brodie's institutional nemesis. Johnson plays her with a kind of moral clarity that never tips into righteousness. She's not the villain, she's the ballast. In her silence, in her way, her eyes scan Brodie like a chess opponent waiting for her to crack. That's power. It's a deeply restrained, quietly moving performance, and somehow no Oscar nomination. And then there's Pamela Franklin playing Sandy, the student who ultimately sees through the glittering spell of Miss Brodie and brings her down. Franklin's arc is astonishing, starting wide-eyed, ending cold-eyed. It's all in her face, her voice, the way she stops being a girl and becomes, well, something else. She and Smith are the film's emotional hinge. Without Sandy's transformation, we're just watching a charismatic woman teach. With it, we're watching the cost of idealism on the minds of the impressionable. Astonishingly, Franklin wasn't nominated either. Neither was Johnson. And I'll say it now, there is no Jean Brodie without them. Here are some other films I would recommend if you love these performances. For Maggie Smith, there's Evil Under the Sun, A Room with a View, Gosford Park, The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearne, and The Lady in the Van. And Celia Johnson, her turn in Brief Encounter is quiet, devastating, and unforgettable, a performance that defined post-war emotional restraint. And Pamela Franklin, she shines in The Innocents and The Legend of Hell House. Sadly, being typecast in horror roles led her to leave film in the late 70s, depriving us of what could have been a long legacy of magnificent performances.
Can anyone tell me who is the greatest Italian painter?
Leonardo da Vinci, Miss Brodie.
That is incorrect, Jenny. The answer is Giotto. He is my favorite.
Miss Brodie name-drops Giotto with an almost sacred reverence. But it wasn't until I read that Giotto received a state funeral in 1337, the first of its kind for any artist. Then it clicked. Brodie doesn't just admire Giotto's art, she's obsessed with his legacy. He was a rebel, a reformer, and revered. That's the kind of immortality that Brodie seeks, not through canvas, but through her students. Yet dangerously, she also admires Mussolini, and even Franco. Her admiration for order and passion becomes blind to the consequences. It's the fatal flaw of a romantic idealist. She wants to mold minds like marble, and in doing so, she forgets they're living, breathing human beings. I know many view Miss Brodie as dangerous, evil even. She manipulates her students, she tries to orchestrate their romantic lives, She turns the Spanish Civil War into a lesson of glamour and heroism. These are not minor offenses. But here's where I push back. She also dares to make the young girls feel chosen, seen, alive. She opens their eyes to art, to language, to possibilities beyond the walls of their classroom, and the expectations of their society. Yes, she wants to shape them, but she wants them to think, to feel deeply, to see themselves as capable of greatness. Is she misguided? Certainly. Narcissistic? Probably. But evil? I'm not so sure. I think Miss Brodie was in her prime, and the tragedy is that she never realized how much that prime belonged to the girls, not to her. I rewatched the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, this time with two friends, Alan and Casey. And you know what? It was even better than I remembered. There is something about watching a film you love with other people that peels back new layers. And this film has layers. One of the first things I noticed, maybe for the first time consciously, is how Miss Brodie is always in color. The rest of the world around her, Edinburgh, the school, and even the other teachers, is shrouded in gray, stiff tweeds, muted tones, conservatism. She is a visual rebellion, a living painting against the gray stone of respectability. She is the Giotto fresco trying to survive in a Gothic hallway. Casey put it bluntly. Gaslighting abound, and he's not wrong. Brodie's manipulation, her emotional hold over the girls, becomes clearer with each scene. At one point, Casey said he started with some sympathy for her, but in the end, he had none. For him, Sandy was the emotional core of the story, the one who sees clearly, who grows beyond. He was also horrified, as we all were, by Mr. Lloyd's behavior. His advances not only towards Miss Brodie, but also towards Sandy. It's one of the film's quieter horrors, made even more disturbing by how normalized it is within the story. Alan, on the other hand, offered a different kind of clarity. He first remembered watching the film on VHS right after college, during a classic film catch-up phase. Back then, he viewed Miss Brodie as sexually liberated, a woman trying to pass that liberation to her girls. But something about it didn't add up. Why did one of the girls die? Why did Miss Brodie flirt with men but avoid intimacy? This time, Alan saw her not as liberated, but as someone using flirtation, her wiles, as he put it, as a kind of currency within a patriarchal world. Her power wasn't in embracing sexuality, it was teasing it, manipulating it. And as her prime began to fade, she clung to that power by orchestrating the lives of her girls. He said she seemed to take pleasure in watching them treated sexually, offering them up to patriarchy's whims while claiming it was for their artistic awakening. And that realization hit hard. Is Miss Brodie a fascist? Not in the traditional sense. She romanticizes Mussolini and Franco, yes, but perhaps more for the aesthetics than the politics. It's male authority she worships, power itself. As Casey pointed out, she seemed shaped, damaged, by a world where she was scorned by men. Italy didn't embrace her. Love abandoned her. So she turns her pain into ideology, into art, into romanticism, into controlling young minds. Alan also drew a striking parallel between Miss Brodie's embrace of fascist ideals and how women, especially in repressive societies, sometimes uphold patriarchal systems as a survival strategy. Brodie, he noted, encourages her girls to admire Mussolini, Franco, and the romanticized vision of the order they represent. It's as if she believes that by aligning with power, they'll be spared the chaos. They'll be chosen. They'll get to focus on art and beauty, while their freedoms erode in the background, just like the art teacher Mr. Lloyd erodes Brodie's own agency, seducing her in the men's room, the corridors, the park, and then moving on to Jenny, then Sandy, and likely, eventually any girl who doesn't resist. The horror is quiet, but complete. When I first saw the film, I had so much more sympathy for Miss Brodie. She was surrounded by dull minds, rigid rules, people who feared beauty. I wanted to defend her. But the other night I saw it more clearly. Her ideals weren't armor for the girls. They were armor for herself. She wasn't trying to teach them how to think. She was trying to make them her legacy, her replacements, her revenge on the world. Still, I don't believe she was evil, or even truly fascist at heart. I think she wanted to mold women who would matter, like Florence Nightingale, Sybil Thorndike, women of substance. The film, in its brilliance, gradually strips the armor away. Scene by scene, it pulls the Jenga pieces out from under Miss Brodie, until what remains is not a progressive icon, but an amoral, deluded figure. A woman who mistakes control for empowerment, who mistreats nearly everyone around her in the name of beauty and conviction. By the end, the story no longer belongs to hers. It shifts quietly, but decisively, to Sandy. She is the one betrayed, the one who grows, the one we trust. And then there's Maggie Smith. So much has been written about her command of the role, but watching it again, I saw new brilliance in her humor. Miss Brodie could have been played as a delusional romantic, or a haughty tyrant, but Smith threads the absurdities of the character into the performance. She's funny, at times hilarious, but never far from danger. That's the magic. Smith makes Brodie fascinating, even when the character is wrong. She bulldozes with wit, she imposes strength with a raised eyebrow. There's one moment where she holds a pause just long enough for it to hurt. That's the mark of an actress in her prime. No pun intended. There's still so much to say, and maybe that's why that film never quite leaves me. I keep thinking about Miss Brodie's face when Sandy turns on her, not in cruelty, but in clarity. It's not betrayal, it's revelation. She made Sandy into someone who can see the truth, and it destroyed her. That to me is tragic, and also kind of beautiful. There are two scenes in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie that I can't shake, no matter how many times I watch them. The first is a confrontation between Miss Brodie and Miss Mackay, after Mackay accepts a letter suggesting a romantic relationship between Brodie and Mr. Lowther. This is the moment where Maggie Smith steps fully into fire. Miss Mackay expects Brodie to resign quietly. She believes she has cornered her. But what happens instead is an eruption. Brodie, dignified, yes, but trembling with fury, refuses. I am a teacher, first, last, always. That line, it doesn't sound defensive. It sounds like a creed, a woman declaring that her very being, her purpose, is wrapped up in this identity.
If scandal is to your taste, Miss Mackay, I shall give you a feast. Miss Brodie, I am a teacher. I am a teacher, first, last, always. Do you imagine that for one instant I will let that be taken from me without a fight?
Smith delivers it with such electric precision that you believe her. You believe that she will not be stripped of this title, not without a fight. And what's remarkable is how Celia Johnson as Mackay holds her composure. She listens, lips tight, eyes narrowing. But you can see it in her. This didn't go the way that she planned. Brodie's fire exposes Mackay's lack of imagination. It's a battle between duty and conviction, and neither woman wins. And then there's the final confrontation, if we want to call it that, between Miss Brodie and Sandy. It's the most devastating scene in the film, not because of any shouting or melodrama, but because of what's not said. Miss Brodie realizes she's been betrayed, and when she sees it in Sandy's eyes, clear, unflinching, resolute, she begins to unravel. Assassin! Assassin! The words echo through the stone corridors like a curse, a cry, a requiem. Sandy doesn't flinch. She walks away, past Brodie, past sentiment, past whatever admiration she once had. It's not a rebellion, it's an execution. Quiet, inevitable, and final. Then we cut to the girls leaving school. One era closing. And we hear Brodie's voice again, not in the room, but in their minds. Little girls, I am in the business of putting old heads on young shoulders. Give me a girl at an impressionable age, and she is mine for life. That's the most unsettling part, because she's right. Even as her ideology collapses, even as she's betrayed, her influence lingers. In Sandy, in the others, even in us watching. She's a ghost that refuses to leave. And in that final moment, Sandy walking out into the world, changed, shaken, and probably a little broken, we realize Brodie got what she wanted, just not in the way she had imagined. Sandy becomes the creme de la creme, because she saw through her. That scene echoes in me like a haunting. It's where all the ideals Brodie clung to, art, strength, beauty, conviction, gets shattered by the reality of what she's done, and who she's become. It's the moment where prime ideals meet the blended, messy truth. film as theatrical and meticulously layered as The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, I knew the coffee needed to match. I chose Bella Donovan from Blue Bottle Coffee, one of their signature blends, and arguably one of the more elite selections in their lineup. Bella Donovan is what happens when classic meets contemporary. A blend of Ethiopian and Latin American beans that conjure notes of molasses, rich chocolate, and just a whisper of raspberry brightness. I brewed it using the Chemex, which is about as dramatic a brew method as you can get without entering full espresso barista mode. The gooseneck kettle, the slow circular pour, the blooming of the grounds, its performance. One Miss Jean Brodie herself would appreciate. Refined, precise, intentional. And the result? The texture was smooth, silky even. The chocolate notes stood out the most, grounded and confident. The raspberry notes lifted just enough to catch your attention, like an arched eyebrow. There's a brightness there, but it's not showy. It lingers at the edge, like Sandy watching the back of the room. And the finish. Oh, the finish. It hits you quietly, then fully, much like Miss Brodie's final assassin ringing through the halls. Blue Bottle Coffee was founded in the early 2000s in Oakland, California, but its name and ethos date back to 17th century Vienna. According to the legend, after the siege of Vienna in 1683, a Polish nobleman opened one of the first European coffee houses and named it the Blue Bottle, honoring the moment coffee culture began to thrive in the West. That sense of heritage, a preserving through innovation, fits Miss Brodie's philosophy to a T. She'd serve this coffee in porcelain, no doubt, and deliver a brief lecture on how one should swirl before sipping, because Bella Donovan is not meant to be rushed. It's meant to be appreciated, savored, like a performance in the Marcia Blaine School for Girls. And that's the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Layered, lasting, and still steeping in my mind like a perfect brew. Some films age, some fade, but this one lingers. Like Bella Donovan, it's complex, bittersweet, and impossible to ignore. Next time on Real Beans, I'm pairing Intelligentsia's house blend with a film that feels like something your grandmother might have loved. If your grandmother had a rebellious streak, a twinkle in her eye, and maybe a few secrets in the sauce. It's new, it's nostalgic, and it just might surprise you. See you then. Thanks for listening. If the prime of Miss Jean Brodie or Bella Donovan stirred something in you, drop a comment, send an email, or just come say hi at realbeans.com. I'd love to hear what's brewing in your world.